When I first told Sarah about my failing marriage, I wasn't looking for advice. I just needed someone to listen. David's long hours at work, the empty conversations, and the growing distance between us were suffocating. Sarah, my best friend since college, seemed like the only person I could trust with this. She had always been there for me, through heartbreaks, bad decisions, and late-night existential crises. Who else could I turn to? That night, we sat on her balcony with a bottle of wine, the jasmine-scented air wrapping around us like a comforter. My voice trembled as I let it all out, tears streaking down my face. "It's like I don't exist to him anymore," I confessed. "I don't even know if he's in love with me." Sarah's expression softened, her eyes glistening with what I thought was empathy. "You deserve so much more, Lisa," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "If he's not making you happy, maybe it's time to ask yourself if this marriage is worth it." Her words hit like a punch to the gut, leaving me more confused than comforted. For weeks, Sarah became my lifeline. I'd send her screenshots of David's texts, recount every missed dinner, and analyze every cold glance he gave me. She'd always respond with the same unwavering support, encouraging me to prioritize my happiness over everything else. For the first time in months, I felt a small glimmer of hope, like I might actually be able to take control of my life. But something began to feel off. Sarah's messages grew less frequent, and our conversations felt rushed, as though she had somewhere better to be. And there was this odd shift in her tone whenever David's name came up. I tried to shake the feeling, blaming it on stress. Sarah was juggling her own wedding plans, work, and 1,000 other things. It made sense for her to be distracted. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. One night, sitting on the couch with David, I decided to test the waters. He was scrolling through his phone, oblivious to my turmoil. "David," I began, my voice almost cracking, "do you think we need to talk about us?" "About everything." He barely looked up. "What do you mean?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "I miss us," I said, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. "I miss how we used to be." David sighed, setting his phone aside. "Lisa, work has been insane lately. I'm sorry if I've been distant. Maybe we've both been distracted." He paused, looking at me with something like regret. "I'll try harder. I promise." It wasn't the grand gesture I'd hoped for, but it felt like a start. For a moment, I let myself believe that things might change. The next morning shattered that illusion. As I was tidying up the living room, I spotted David's phone on the coffee table, buzzing with notifications. My stomach tightened. I told myself not to look, that I was better than this, but my hand moved on its own. I unlocked the screen, my pulse racing. Most of the messages were mundane, the usual work updates and group chats. But then I saw Sarah's name. My heart sank as I opened the thread. At first, it was harmless, inside jokes and friendly banter. But as I scrolled, the messages grew more intimate. Late-night conversations. A level of familiarity that made my skin crawl. And then, the message that stopped me cold. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." My hand shook as I read and reread the words, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the truth was glaringly obvious. Sarah, my best friend, my confidant, was involved with David. My husband. The room spun around me, and I felt like I might be sick. Every memory of confiding in Sarah, every tear I'd shed in front of her, came rushing back. How could she? How could he? I didn't know what to do. Scream? Cry? Confront them? Instead, I just sat there, staring at the phone, my mind a whirlwind of betrayal and disbelief. One thing was clear, I couldn't act impulsively. I needed to know how deep this betrayal ran before I decided what to do next. I decided to play the waiting game, though it was agony. Each day, I pretended everything was normal, even as I felt the world crumbling beneath my feet. I needed clarity, proof that would leave no room for denial or manipulation. So, I started paying closer attention, piecing together the subtle signals I'd missed before. David's sudden enthusiasm for early morning runs, a habit he'd never had before, made me suspicious. "It clears my head," he'd say with a casual shrug, sweat dripping from his temples as he came through the door. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to have developed a newfound love for fitness, constantly posting gym selfies and glowing captions about how working out gives her life balance. Coincidence? I doubted it. One afternoon, as I walked past David's car in the driveway, a faint scent stopped me in my tracks. It was a perfume, light, floral, and distinctly not mine. My heart pounded as I leaned closer, inhaling deeply.
Sarah.
I recognized the fragrance. She'd worn it for years. I felt my stomach churn. But it wasn't just the scent. It was little things. The way David seemed overly protective of his phone, or how Sarah's invitations to catch up had all but vanished. Once inseparable, we now communicated in clipped, stilted conversations. I started to question every memory, every shared laugh, wondering how much of it had been a lie. Then, there was the wedding, Sarah's wedding. Invitations had gone out weeks earlier, and David had insisted we RSVP immediately. "It'll be fun," he'd said, a forced cheeriness in his voice. But now, the thought of attending made me sick. The idea of standing there, watching her walk down the aisle while harboring this secret, felt unbearable. Yet I knew I had to go. I needed to see them together. I needed the truth. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and golden, as if mocking the darkness inside me. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that exuded confidence even as my hands trembled. David seemed oddly relaxed, humming to himself as he adjusted his tie. "You look beautiful," he said, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. I wanted to scream. At the venue, everything was perfect. Rows of chairs adorned with fresh flowers lined the aisle, and the air buzzed with excitement. Guests mingled, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. I felt like an outsider in a world I no longer belonged to. Sarah was radiant, her laughter ringing out as she floated from group to group, her bridal glow almost too much to bear. Then I saw at a glance. A fleeting, loaded exchange between David and Sarah that sent a chill down my spine. It was quick, but unmistakable. Her eyes softened, her lips curved into a secretive smile, and David's face mirrored hers. My chest tightened as I clenched the flute of champagne in my hand, the glass trembling against my palm. "Lisa, are you okay?" It was Sarah's mother, her voice pulling me back to the present. I plastered on a smile, nodding quickly. "Just a little overwhelmed," I lied. She patted my arm sympathetically before drifting away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As the ceremony began, I couldn't focus on the vows or the music. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did anyone else know? Was I the fool everyone pitied, or had they all been blindsided? Too? My fingers itched to grab my phone, to scroll through their messages one more time, but I resisted. Not here.
Not now.
When the officiant pronounced Sarah and her new husband married, the crowd erupted in applause. I clapped too, though my hands felt like lead. The reception followed, a whirlwind of dancing, speeches, and endless toasts. I tried to avoid David and Sarah as much as possible, but the room felt too small, the walls closing in with every passing moment. Then came the moment I'd been dreading, the bridal party's dance. Sarah's husband led her to the center of the floor, and the music swelled. They moved together gracefully, oblivious to everything else. But it wasn't them I was watching. It was David. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes fixed on Sarah. The look on his face was unmistakable, longing, regret, something deeper than I'd ever seen him express for me. I felt the tears rising, but I refused to let them fall. Not here.
Not in front of them.
Instead, I slipped out of the room, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. I stood there for a long time, breathing deeply, trying to steady myself. "Lisa?" His voice startled me, and I turned to see David standing in the doorway, concern etched across his face. "Are you okay?" I stared at him, my mind spinning. For a moment, I considered laying it all out right then and there. The texts, the glances, the scent of Sarah's perfume in his car. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed a plan. I needed to make sure that when I exposed them, There would be no escape, no chance for them to twist the narrative. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just needed some air." He hesitated, then nodded, retreating back inside. As I watched him go, a new determination took hold of me. They thought they'd gotten away with it, but they were wrong. I wasn't the weak, clueless woman they believed me to be. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The days following the wedding felt like walking through a minefield. Every interaction with David or Sarah carried a weight I couldn't shake. I knew I had to act, but the question of how gnawed at me. Confronting them outright would be satisfying, but it wasn't enough. They needed to feel the same betrayal and humiliation they'd inflicted on me. I wanted them to pay. Then, a thought struck me: Sarah's wedding photos. She'd hired a well-known photographer and boasted endlessly about the perfect shots they'd capture. What if there was evidence in those photos? I couldn't risk waiting for her to share them online, so I called the photographer, pretending to be Sarah. "Hi, this is Sarah Turner," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I wanted to confirm if the wedding gallery is ready yet." The photographer's cheery reply almost made me feel guilty. "Almost. We've just uploaded the preliminary gallery. You can access it here," he said, sending me the link. I opened the gallery that evening, scrolling through image after image. At first, it was all as expected: Sarah and her husband looking blissfully happy, guests laughing and dancing. But then I found it. A photo of David and Sarah, their heads bent close together during the reception. Their faces were too intimate, too familiar. And then another, his hand lightly brushing her lower back as they spoke. It wasn't overt, but to me, it screamed volumes. Armed with this, I began to devise my plan. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to destroy the illusion they'd so carefully crafted. It was time to expose their betrayal publicly. I started small, planting seeds of doubt among our mutual friends. During casual conversations, I dropped subtle hints about Sarah and David spending a lot of time together lately. "Oh, did you see Sarah and David chatting at the wedding? They looked so close," I'd say with a feigned laugh. The reactions were predictable: raised eyebrows, curious glances. People love a good scandal, and I was giving them just enough to start asking questions. Next, I created an anonymous email account and sent the incriminating photos to Sarah's husband with a simple message: "You deserve to know the truth." It felt cruel, but he had a right to know. And if it caused the cracks in their perfect facade to spread faster, all the better. The fallout was immediate. Sarah's husband confronted her within hours. My phone buzzed with a flurry of messages from Sarah, each more frantic than the last. "Lisa, we need to talk. Please call me. It's important. I know you're upset, but we can fix this. Please." I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on David. That evening, I waited until he came home, his face drawn and tired. He barely got through the door before I spoke. "David, we need to talk." My voice was calm, but firm. He looked at me, confusion flickering across his face. "I know about you and Sarah," I continued, pulling out my phone and showing him the photos. His face drained of color. "Lisa, it's not what it looks like," he stammered, but I cut him off. "Don't insult me by lying," I snapped. "I trusted you, David. I trusted both of you. Do you have any idea what that's like? To pour your heart out to your best friend, only to realize she's stabbing you in the back." My voice cracked, but I held my ground. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand.
Don't.
Just don't. Pack a bag and get out. David's protests were weak, half-hearted. He knew there was no salvaging this. I watched as he packed his things, my heart a mix of anger and pain. When the door finally closed behind him, I felt a wave of relief. For the first time in weeks, the house felt lighter. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Sarah's texts had stopped, but the whispers among our friends were growing louder. At least one mutual friend had reached out, hinting that they'd heard something strange about Sarah and David. I played innocent, letting them fill in the blanks. The more people who knew, the harder it would be for Sarah to escape unscathed. Then came the final step of my plan: the bridal party group chat. I uploaded the photos of David and Sarah with a single caption. Funny how the most perfect day can hide the ugliest secrets. The reaction was explosive. Messages poured in, some expressing disbelief, others outright rage. Sarah finally broke her silence, responding with a desperate plea. Lisa, why are you doing this? We can talk about it privately. But I was done talking. I left the group chat, my heart racing but resolute. The truth was out, and there was no going back. They built their relationship on lies and betrayal, and now everyone knew it. As I sat alone that evening, staring out the window, I felt an odd mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, even a hint of satisfaction. The pain they'd caused me hadn't disappeared, but I'd taken back my power. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. As much as I wanted to believe I could move on, the days after my grand reveal were anything but peaceful. The fallout spread faster than I had anticipated. Friends, colleagues, even casual acquaintances, it felt like everyone had chosen sides. And somehow, despite the evidence, some people weren't on mine. Don't you think this was a bit extreme? One friend asked over coffee, her voice cautious, but edged with judgment. I mean, Sarah was your best friend. And David's your husband. Couldn't you have handled it privately? I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. They didn't betray me privately. They flaunted it right under my nose. I didn't start this. They did. The friend nodded, looking unconvinced. I realized then that some people would never understand the depth of my betrayal. And maybe they didn't need to. I wasn't seeking validation. I was seeking closure. Still, their reaction stung. What I didn't expect, though, was Sarah's retaliation. A few days after the bridal party debacle, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "You've gone too far." Against my better judgment, I opened it. Lisa, I can't believe you've done this to me.
To us.
Yes, I made a mistake, but what you're doing is cruel. You've ruined my marriage, my friendships, my reputation. Was that your goal? To destroy me? Because if it was, congratulations. You've succeeded. But don't think I'll just sit back and take it. People are starting to see through you, Lisa. They're realizing this isn't about justice. It's about revenge. And revenge has a way of turning on the person seeking it. Be careful. Sarah. My hands shook as I read her words. Anger bubbled up, hot and unrelenting. She was playing the victim, twisting the narrative to suit her. I wanted to fire back, to tell her exactly what I thought of her, but I stopped myself. She wanted a reaction, and I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I focused on what came next. David had been staying with a friend since our confrontation, but I knew he wouldn't stay away forever. True to form, he showed up at the house a week later, looking disheveled and regretful. Lisa, he began, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Can we talk? I crossed my arms, blocking his path. What is there to talk about, David? You made your choices. I screwed up, he admitted, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try. I want to fix this. I almost laughed. Fix this? After everything? David, you didn't just break my trust. You shattered it. You made a fool of me. And now you want to patch it up like it's a leaky roof? He winced at my words, but I didn't care. I'll do whatever it takes, he said. Counseling, quitting my job, anything. It's too late, I said quietly. You should have thought about that before you betrayed me. I shut the door in his face, my heart pounding. It felt like a victory, but also a loss. A part of me wanted to let him back in, to believe in the possibility of redemption. But the scars ran too deep. Sarah, on the other hand, was a different story. Her emails continued, each one more desperate than the last. She tried every angle, guilt, remorse, even anger. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. Engaging with her would only give her more ammunition. Then, one evening, I received a call from Sarah's husband. His voice was strained, a mix of sadness and anger. Lisa, I don't know what to do anymore. Sarah won't admit to anything. She's insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that you're blowing things out of proportion. Do you have proof? Something undeniable. I hesitated. Sharing more evidence felt like pouring salt on a wound, but he deserved the truth. Check her messages, I said finally. Look for anything from David. You'll find what you need. The line went silent, and I wondered if I'd gone too far. But an hour later, he called back. You were right, he said, his voice hollow. I found everything. Thank you. As I hung up, a sense of finality settled over me. The truth was out. There were no more secrets, no more lies to uncover. Yet, the closure I'd sought felt hollow. I had exposed them, yes, but at what cost? That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The silence in the house was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past weeks. For the first time, I let myself cry, not out of anger or betrayal, but out of grief. Grief for the friendships I'd lost, the love that had crumbled, and the person I'd been before all of this. I didn't know what came next, but one thing was certain. I'd survived. And I'd continue to survive, one day at a time. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The storm that had consumed me left scars, but it also left lessons. As painful as it had been, I realized I couldn't live in the ruins forever. It was time to rebuild for myself. The first step was reclaiming my space. I redecorated the house, erasing every trace of the life David and I had shared. The bedroom, once filled with reminders of our broken marriage, became a sanctuary. I painted the walls a calming blue, swapped out the old furniture, and added personal touches that made it mine. With every change, I felt a little lighter, a little stronger. Work became my refuge. I poured myself into my career, taking on new challenges and responsibilities. My boss noticed, offering me a promotion that came with a significant pay raise. It wasn't just about the money, it was about proving to myself that I could stand on my own. I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth. But healing wasn't just about moving forward, it was also about letting go. I knew I couldn't carry the weight of my anger forever. So one quiet evening, I sat down and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Sarah. I told her how deeply she'd hurt me, how her betrayal had shattered my trust and our friendship. But I also told her that I was letting go of my resentment. Not for her sake, but for mine. I never sent the letter. Instead, I burned it, watching the flames consume my pain. The second letter was to David. This one I mailed. I told him I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I wished him well, but made it clear that our chapter was closed. There would be no going back. Surprisingly, David responded. His letter was heartfelt, full of apologies and regrets. He told me he was in therapy, trying to understand why he'd made the choices he did. He didn't ask for reconciliation. He knew that door was closed, but he thanked me for giving him a chance to make amends. It was closure, the kind I hadn't expected but deeply appreciated. Sarah, on the other hand, disappeared from my life completely. I heard through mutual friends that her marriage had ended, though the details were murky. Some said her husband had moved out immediately after discovering the truth. Others whispered that Sarah had tried to salvage things, but the damage was too great. I didn't dwell on it. Her life was no longer my concern. What surprised me most was the support that came from unexpected places. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering kindness and understanding. My parents, who had always been reserved about my marriage, rallied around me with unwavering support. Even my neighbors, who I barely knew, stopped by with words of encouragement. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, that even in the darkest times, there was light. One evening, as I sat on my newly redecorated balcony, sipping wine and watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The pain was still there, but it was quieter now, a distant echo rather than a consuming roar. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about the future, about what I wanted, and who I wanted to be. I started journaling, capturing my thoughts and feelings in a way I never had before. It was cathartic, a way to process the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed me. And in those pages, I found clarity. I didn't want my story to be defined by betrayal and heartbreak. I wanted it to be a story of resilience, growth, and self-discovery. Months later, I took a trip to the mountains, a solo getaway I'd been dreaming of for years. Standing at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a vast expanse of forest and sky, I felt something shift within me. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying had finally lifted. I wasn't the same person who had cried on Sarah's balcony or stared in shock at David's phone. I was stronger now, wiser. And I was ready to move forward. The experience taught me something invaluable. People will fail you, even the ones you trust the most. But their failures don't define you. What defines you is how you choose to rise after the fall. I chose to rise, to rebuild, and to embrace the person I was becoming. As I packed my bags to leave the mountains, I glanced at the journal I'd filled during my stay. The last entry read, "This is not the end. It's the beginning." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.